Hey guys, welcome back to Parasykecrew TV, where today we'll be diving back into the Celebrity Conspiracy Theory Iceberg, a series where we explore the dark corners of Hollywood and the disturbing secrets of the world's most famous celebrities, from conspiracy theories to bizarre scandals and open secrets to chilling and infamous crimes. So strap in and buckle up because this is about to get weird. Oh, and before we get started, if you don't mind, could you
hit the like button, would you kindly?
And here in New York, movie fans express shock and sadness over the death of Natalie Wood, one of this nation's most glamorous actresses.
After an argument between her husband and actor Christopher Walken, when she stormed off a yacht this weekend and apparently fell into the sea.
The police say she'd gone out in the boat by herself and either slipped, fell, or jumped off.
Her husband, actor Robert Wagner, had often said she was a poor swimmer. He has been in seclusion since yesterday.
On November 29th, 1981, the lifeless body of actress Natalie Wood, famous for her roles in Miracle on 24th Street, Rebel Without a Cause, and West Side Story, was discovered floating in the waters off the shore of Catalina Island. The night before, she had spent with her husband, actor Robert Wagner, and her co-star, none other than Christopher Walken, on Wood's 55-foot yacht, the Splendor, along with Captain Dennis Davern. At the time, Natalie had been taking a break from acting and had 2 children with Robert Wagner, but was filming her comeback movie with Christopher Walken, and the two had become fast friends. After Natalie's body was found the next morning, Walken, Wagner, and Davern were questioned for about 10 to 15 minutes on the scene before being released. And the next day, November 30th, 1981, LA coroner Thomas Noguchi concluded that Wood's death was the result of accidental drowning. In 1986, Christopher Walken was asked about the tragedy during an interview with People magazine. It's safe to say he kinda snapped in his response.
I don't know what happened. She slipped and fell in the water. I was in bed. It was a terrible thing. Look, we're in a conversation I won't have. It's a fucking bore.
Now, one could assume that Walken was apprehensive about talking over the events that took place on the Splendor that night in 1981 because they culminated in the death and loss of his co-star and friend. But details would begin to emerge, if not very slowly over the years, that would call into question the story that the 3 men gave about Natalie Wood's death. And in many people's opinions that are familiar with the case, it would become very clear what actually happened to Natalie Wood. Potential reason that Walken may have avoided speaking publicly about Natalie Wood could be that he, Davern, and Wagner all struggled to maintain a cohesive narrative surrounding that night's events. The original story was that Natalie, Robert, and Christopher were talking and drinking wine on the deck of the yacht, and the 3 were almost certainly very drunk, as according to multiple witness statements from people that had seen them on the beach in the days prior. The 3 were running through multiple bottles of wine, champagne, and dozens of rum daiquiris daily. That night, Natalie went to bed before the 2 men. Then Walken went to bed, and then Robert went to bed. There was a dinghy knocking up against the side of the boat, which must have annoyed Natalie, who then got out of bed, put on a jacket, went up to the deck to tighten the dinghy rope. Somehow, she must have hit her head and fell into the water. Natalie couldn't swim and was found wearing a heavy jacket, so he drowned. Years later, Robert would admit that he and Natalie had an ongoing argument over whether she should continue her acting work or retire so that she could raise the children. That night, the argument got heated, so she went to bed. Then, as the conversation continued between Robert Wagner and Christopher Walken, who was literally in the middle of shooting a movie with Natalie, told Robert that he believed Natalie had a very strong natural talent for acting and that, in his opinion, she should continue to do so. Robert Wagner became enraged and smashed a wine bottle, telling Walken to mind his own business. Now, this was Robert Wagner's account from years after the fact, where he kind of let a few more details slip out, but it seems as though even this later account still leaves out some very important details. According to Captain Davern, Natalie had become infatuated with Walken while filming their movie and claimed they had been flirting for the duration of the yacht's voyage. The night of the argument, when Wagner became enraged, Davern claims he heard Wagner scream at Walken, "What are you trying to do?" My wife? Davern also claimed that Natalie was up on the deck with the men until the argument reached this point. She stormed to her room. Wagner followed, and there was a huge fight that sounded both very loud verbally and like it got physical. Later that night, he saw Wagner looking disheveled and sweating profusely, and heard the dinghy being untied hours later. At 1:30 a.m., Wagner and Davern were up having a drink together, when Wagner left to check on Natalie before returning saying he couldn't find her. When Davern feared that she may have fallen overboard, he went to use the searchlight, which Wagner prevented him from doing because he, quote, didn't want to bring attention to the yacht. Eventually, when she couldn't be found, they radioed for emergency assistance. Davern has been vocal about his experience that night. Robert Wagner, although he has been confronted by some family members and media who don't necessarily believe his story, did go on to live a long life with a successful career in acting. And choosing to avoid the topic altogether has seemingly worked out very well for Christopher Walken, as I doubt many people familiar with him even have any kind of idea that this case exists. Truthfully, I don't think Christopher Walken had anything to do with harming Natalie whatsoever, and that's probably part of the reason he's stayed quiet about it. But I do feel that he knows more about what happened that night than he's ever really let on. In 2011, the original coroner stated that his original verdict came with various unanswered questions, and the case was reopened. In February 2018, the LA Sheriff's Department formally reclassified the death as suspicious and named the now 94-year-old Wagner as a person of interest. It's been noted in the press that Walken has spoken to detectives since the case reopened, and that he has never been a person of interest, nor a suspect. For now, the death of Natalie Wood, who or what killed her, and Christopher Walken's opinions on what really happened that night remain a mystery.
Do you think that the real story of Natalie Wood's death has actually come out?
The real story of her death is that she drowned. And nobody knows how she drowned or what happened except her. That's what it is. There is no real story. You know, there's nobody will ever know.
With everything going on in the world, it can start to feel impossible to take care of yourself. But today's video sponsor, AG1, makes that a lot easier. AG1 is a daily foundational nutrition supplement that supports whole body health in a delicious, easy-to-use formula. You just scoop, shake, and enjoy. About 6 weeks ago, I was heading home from a weekend trip with a ton of editing to do. Just wondering why I was always feeling so tired and worn out, even though I exercise and my job is sitting at a computer. During that drive, I was listening to a podcast and they kept running ads for AG1. It made me realize I've never really thought about my gut biome or my immune support, so I thought maybe I'd give AG1 a try. Now, I don't know what kind of people they have working over in the marketing division at AG1, but I'd wager they had a couple psychics on the team, because the very next morning I had a lovely email from AG1 offering to send me some product to try and talking about a partnership. Well, I tried it, and now it's become an integral part of my morning routine. I feel like AG1 has done an incredible job helping me increase my energy levels and helps me recover during stressful periods, which for me is every day. Every serving of AG1 contains vitamins and minerals, stress adaptogens, pre- and probiotics, antioxidants, superfoods and mushrooms, and digestive support. To be honest, I thought AG1 was going to taste bad, but since 2010 they've improved their formula 52 times. They know what they're doing. It tastes good. You can try AG1 for yourself using this QR code or the link in my description to get 5 free travel packs like this and a full year's supply of vitamin D3 K2 supplement. It combines what you would normally get from multiple individual supplements into a simpler, more easy to use and effective way to raise your baseline health while supporting daily performance and healthy aging. So when you drink it, you know you're supporting your gut health, your immune health, and getting all the delicious little ingredients your body is so desperate for in this bleak and dying reality. So use this QR code or the link in my description to get your full year supply of vitamin D3 K2 and your 5 free travel packs of AG1 now. And a huge thanks to AG1 for sponsoring this video. I have to warn you now. The following segment is probably the most depraved, disturbing topic I have ever covered. So I want to issue a strict viewer discretion warning and a trigger warning for basically every form of abuse.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to some more Super Jim'll Fix It.
He had keys, offices, flats. Jimmy Savile also had their total trust. He abused that, instead using his hospital visits to abuse some of the most vulnerable.
No, women know too much. I'm all for girls that don't know too much.
You used to be a wrestler, didn't you? Is that right?
I still am.
Oh, yeah.
I'm feared in every girls' school in this country.
The charge nurse, I said that Jimmy Savile had tried to touch me intimately.
He's not what you think you know. The forces of darkness are at work there. It was real kid stuff for adults, but there's nothing wrong with that.
Jimmy Savile was an incredibly popular, extremely famous host and DJ in the UK. He hosted the BBC shows Top of the Pops and Jim'll Fix It. During his lifetime, Savile was well known in the United Kingdom for his eccentric image and extensive charitable work. Savile was a very close friend with British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, and even spent 11 consecutive New Year's Eve celebrations with Thatcher and her family. Savile did charity work at Stoke Mandeville Hospital, an interest that was shared with Prince, now King Charles. The two became fast friends, spending a lot of time together, both at Savile's residence in Glencoe and Charles' official home in St. James Palace. Savile even hand-wrote an unofficial set of guidelines on how the prince and his royal staff should respond to any disasters that may occur. Charles then showed the dossier to his father, Prince Philip, who passed the contents on to Queen Elizabeth II. Savile was even awarded a papal knighthood by Pope John Paul II. The issue is, Jimmy Savile was a pedophile.
The evidence is now overwhelming that one of Britain's most beloved entertainers, the late Sir Jimmy Savile, was also a predatory sex offender. It's believed he abused young children over many decades, and 2 charities in his name have shut their doors.
A serial abuser of children.
As he was knighted by the Queen and the Pope, he was, it now seems, leading an appalling double life, abusing scores of young girls and some boys, some in hospitals, some in care homes, some in the very studios that made him a star.
Savile has now been accused of 76 crimes in the West Yorkshire area, involving 68 victims. 18 of his victims were under the age of 13. The youngest was 5 years old.
And according to some, a killer.
At one stage, police considered that Savile could have been involved in the disappearance and murder of women in Yorkshire before Sutcliffe was found and convicted. A dentist even made a cast of Savile's teeth in order to check against bite marks found on the victims of the Yorkshire Ripper's victims. What do you make of that?
Well, one of the victims was found outside or in the park outside his flat in Roundhay Park. He'd only recently moved in. There was a dentist in London who was asked to make this cast of his teeth because 2 of the victims had been found with bite marks.
So, was Jimmy Savile just perfectly disguising his depraved true nature from all of his politician and powerful royal friends? Well, dating all the way back to a 1978 interview with BBC, lead singer of the Sex Pistols, Johnny Rotten, inferred that Jimmy Savile was involved in an abuse scandal that had been covered up. The interview was never aired, and resulted in Johnny being subsequently banned from BBC. Savile passed away in 2011, and since then, the disgusting truth has been slowly unraveling, meaning he spent almost his entire adult life getting away with some of, if not the worst crimes imaginable, and it almost seems as though he was allowed. But why? Was he so integral to the power structure at the time? His advice was so important? Or was it because he was right at home among like minds? And similar to many other powerful offenders, he was never held accountable. Whenever a journalist would begin investigating, the story would be buried by editors. Whenever a detective would try to open a case, the upper levels of the police force wouldn't allow it.
Reports says police forces failed for almost 50 years to act on abuse allegations made against the TV presenter Jimmy Savile.
It also reveals West Yorkshire Police were sent a letter by the Metropolitan Police 15 years ago suggesting Savile was a pedophile, but it was never followed up. And despite the fact he lived in Leeds, the force said it had no intelligence reports on him. Since his death, it's emerged 40 of his victims were from West Yorkshire, Kathy Killick reports.
And anytime a victim tried to come forward, they were silenced, one way or another.
The charge nurse, I said that Jimmy Savile had tried to touch me intimately, and she just said I was making up bizarre statements, that I was being bizarre, that it wouldn't be tolerated, that, you know, that you're just making all these bizarre thoughts. You obviously need isolation.
Jimmy Savile, via connections made through his charitable organizations, was allowed unfettered access to almost any hospital of his choosing. He was allowed in any room to do as he pleased. He used this access to abuse the most vulnerable children he could find. One of those hospitals was Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital, where several witnesses and victims have come forward, claiming Savile would prey on those with psychiatric issues and the mentally challenged. Another was Duncroft, a girls' home and school in Surrey. The school was live-in and hosted girls ranging from 14 to 16 years old. According to Sheila Terry Bailey, a survivor of Savile's abuse, Savile was given free rein, would often bring the girls cigarettes and alcohol, and had his own guest bedroom in the girls' school. And in danger of sounding hyperbolic, this man really seemed to be a demon walking among us. He didn't even try to hide it sometimes. He was just out there committing assaults live on television.
So, ladies and gentlemen, all we can say is good night from all of us here on Top of the Pops, and it's number one time, and of course, if you believe me now, it's from the one and only Chicago. And thank you very much indeed.
And although it was pretty much an open secret, the royals, top officials in the UK government, and the Pope continued to treat Savile as an ally, a confidant, and a trusted friend. I wonder why? Well, consider the following. Pope John Paul II, the Pope that knighted Jimmy Savile, has been accused of protecting pedophile priests when he was Archbishop of Krakow in his native country, Poland. And what about Savile's extremely close ties with the royal family? Well, we have a very recent example, with Prince Andrew being a very close friend with Epstein. There is another lesser-known accusation involving abuse, children, and the royals. In May of 2021, a story broke in Canada about Kamloops Indian Residential School, once Canada's largest residential school. Even the way the school was populated and operated was savage. Indigenous children from the surrounding area were forcibly removed from their homes following the introduction of mandatory attendance laws in the 1920s. The children were not allowed to speak their native languages and would be whipped if they did. The school closed in 1978. In the late 1990s, some children's teeth were found on the school grounds. In the early 2000s, a tourist discovered a juvenile rib in the area. In 2021, Sarah Bollier, an anthropologist at the University of the Fraser Valley, surveyed the area with ground-penetrating radar and concluded the probable presence of about 200 unmarked graves. It would turn out to be the remains of 215 children, the youngest of which being about 3 years old. Now, this was pretty major news in 2021, but what does this have to do with Savile and the royals? Well, another story resurfaced during the Kamloops media blitz in 2021. But this one was quickly debunked, fact-checked many times over, and buried, which of course made me dig just a little bit deeper. This story was told by William Arnold Combs, an interior Salish spirit dancer and survivor of the Kamloops and Mission Indian residential schools. William was born in 1952. And according to his testimony, he and the other children suffered terrible tortures at the residential schools. William alleged that he witnessed a Brother Murphy throw a child from a third-story balcony, killing him, and was responsible for the deaths of 2 other students. William himself had been put on a rack and had some of his bones broken in the Kamloops school basement after he tried running away. He also claimed that he saw Brother Murphy and another priest burying a child in the orchard one night. In a long and well-detailed statement he gave in 2010, William describes what he witnessed in October of 1964, when he was just 12 years old. According to Mr. Combs, that fall day in 1964, Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip arrived at Kamloops School with no entourage. The children received fresh clothes and good food for the first time in months the day before the royals arrived. When they did arrive, they did so with little fanfare. No large entourage or protection, just the Queen and the Prince, and more than likely a driver. That day, a large group of the kids went on a picnic along with the royals and some of the school's administrators. William then witnessed the 2 royals leave with 10 of the children who would never return. They vanished completely. The group that William claims disappeared was 7 boys and 3 girls, aged 6 to 14. William couldn't remember their names other than Cecilia and Edward. William was also adamant that his friend George Adolph also witnessed this event. Obviously, this is an extremely salacious and disturbing claim that the Queen of England had basically abducted and done God knows what with 10 children from a school that would later be exposed for having a mass grave full of indigenous children that had been abused and killed. According to Reuters, an international news agency who wrote an article debunking Combs' claims in 2021, this just couldn't have happened. The monarch did not visit Kamloops in 1964, and Reuters found no credible reports relating to these claims, which seemingly stem from a conspiracy theorist. Now, the funny thing about that statement is that Reuters left sources linked in the article that showed every official trip the royals have ever taken, and of all the places that Queen Elizabeth II could have been at that time, she was, in fact, in Canada for over a week, from October 5th to October 13th, to attend a one-day commemoration in Quebec. Now, there are some holes in this story. Quebec is a 5-hour plane ride from BC, but let's be honest, the royals easily had the time and resources to take a little trip during that 8-day window. Some debunkers in 2021 claimed that William Arnold Combs was just making up conspiracy theories to try to harm the royals' legacy and using this big mass grave Kamloops story to try to get attention. But that's not possible either. William went public about the abuse he suffered at Kamloops School in 2007. And as far as I could tell, he went public with his claims about the royal visits in 2010. In February of 2011, Combs would visit St. Paul's Catholic Hospital in Vancouver to meet with a new doctor and receive some tests. According to his partner May, William was in good health for being a 59-year-old man. However, upon arriving to meet with this new doctor, Combs was immediately admitted to the hospital, and within just a few days he was dead. The official coroner's report read that William died of disseminated tuberculosis, but a nurse, Erica, that was providing care for William Combs in his final days, has come forward with a statement that she saw no signs or symptoms nor treatment for any form of TB.
Stress kidneys. Any indication, they claim his cause of death was disseminated tuberculosis. Was there any indication of tuberculosis when you saw him?
None whatsoever. Like I said, he wasn't coughing and there was no fever and his chest sounds were clear when I did the head to toe. Yeah, there was absolutely no sputum, evidence of sputum, anything spat on towels. Sometimes they'll hide it like that, and there was nothing like that. There was nothing in the charts of any previous nurses that had seen any blood in his sputum, which is what you cough up. I did, in that shift, ask the CNO about his undiagnosed bloodborne infection, why he wasn't on an IV, remarked that his blood pressure was low and that he was dizzy and that perhaps he should be, and why isn't there any broad spectrum antibiotics being given to him given the undiagnosed bloodborne infection. He literally had nothing in him. He was obviously very sick feeling, and there was absolutely no contagion protocols in place for myself or any of the other people that came in and or out of that room.
So a lot of anomalies.
Yeah, there was a lot of things that didn't make sense. I did a total of 4 shifts with him, and the CNL, like, she would hear me on my questions about why he doesn't have an IV, he's not drinking or eating well, and no antibiotics. She would hear me on it and she'd tell me she'd get back to me, but she didn't, which was unusual for her. She was a long time experienced.
So based on what you saw, some of the other symptoms you saw on him, what do you think, what's your medical opinion about his cause of death?
In hindsight, hyperkeratosis, the dark urine, he had these lines on his nails. They weren't ridged. It looked like the moon of your nail bed went halfway up, and it was a slightly darker singular line right across. Those lines combined with the constant abdominal pains, the dizziness, and moments of almost delirium that I saw him have.
The delirious. What does that all indicate?
And these lines, which are called Means lines, indicate arsenic poisoning. With specifically in combination with the hyperkeratosis, the papules I saw on his skin that at first looked like scratches, but when I looked closer, they were just little bumps.
So in your opinion, is that what he died of?
It could very well be. An undiagnosed bloodborne infection doesn't manifest as measles, and he had no fever. And
no TB.
And no TB.
So you disagree with the coroner's report?
Oh, absolutely.
If Nurse Erica is to be believed, William Combs was poisoned. So, a man comes forward in 2010 saying not only were children abused and killed at this school, but that he also saw them being buried, and that the royal couple showed up in October 1964 and took 10 kids away. Then, less than a year later, he dies of presumably arsenic poisoning. 10 years later, surprise, there's a mass grave full of children where this conspiracy theorist said there would be one. It certainly seems to be an outrageous claim and story. I'm not saying I believe William Combs' claims about the royal family showing up at the school and taking those children. It was one of those cases where I couldn't help but keep digging because the connections just kept popping up, making these wild claims seem more and more possible. And that incredibly, overly long tangent was all just to open up the possibility that maybe Jimmy Savile didn't sneak his horrible abuse of children by any of his powerful friends. Maybe that's why they were such good friends to begin with. On September 4th, 2019, Canadian singer-songwriter Grimes posted this picture of a strange tablet. While at the time it didn't seem to draw much attention from anyone other than her own fans, after certain events began to play out in early 2020, the image began to make the rounds in conspiracy forums. A closer inspection of the tablet seems to show a set of lines made up by carved emojis. And although many have pontificated on the potential meanings for each line, line 6 in particular seems to exhibit a few ominous warnings. The opening emojis are a microphone, headphones, and I.O. I.O., also known as Garrett Falls Lockhart, was an American techno DJ and record producer who at the time of Grimes' post was alive and well, but he would unfortunately pass away November 23, 2020. A tweet published by his family on May 18, 2021 concluded that he died from a sudden and fatal arrhythmia brought along by late-stage Hashimoto's thyroiditis. I.O. was also collaborating with Grimes on Violence, the project that this tablet image was supposedly marketing, so that's more than likely the reason for his inclusion. Now, the next symbol in line 6 was a little harder for me to make out, but going off the idea that all of these symbols are based on emojis and the next symbol being a DNA strand, it seems clear that the rest of this line reads as follows: Petri dish, DNA strand, a microbe, 3 hypodermic needles, and all that equals a UFO. Now, it is a little unsettling looking at that post from 2019 through the lens of everything that has occurred over the last few years. Clearly, a lot of people think the Petri dish, DNA strand, and microbe refer to a certain virus. Then the 3 syringes being the widely and heavily debated response to that event or series of events. And the UFO is odd as well, as immediately after we seem to kind of get out from under the shadow of the pandemic and its effects on our daily lives. Divisions of the government and media immediately pivoted to this very bizarre UFO/UAP disclosure movement, which many theorists are dubious of and think is just a distraction or precursor to Project Bluebeam, the theory in which the United States government, in collaboration with NASA, is planning a massive false flag operation in which they will simulate a second coming of Christ or an extraterrestrial invasion using advanced technology in order to establish a new world order. Line 7 of the tablet features mostly weapons of war, possibly hinting at the conflict between Russia and Ukraine that would also follow the outbreak. The last line of the tablet seems to hint at a nuclear apocalypse ending the world. Now, maybe Grimes has some insider knowledge being so close with Elon Musk. It is certainly strange and kind of unsettling how closely those emojis resemble some of the events that would begin to play out just a few months later. A few years ago, we released a prophecy on this ancient tablet. Since most of the bad omens have come true, we've canceled this stone and are releasing a new prophecy. Huge apologies for any inconvenience this may have caused. And as Nick Hinton points out in the replies, it seems as though we've now traded out nuclear war for the AI singularity. Yay. Hey guys, I just want to thank you so much for watching the video. Please like the video if you haven't already and subscribe. Every time I post a new video, I get a ton of comments from people saying that they've had to subscribe over and over again, so who knows what's going on there? Thank you all so much, and I'll see you in the next video.